Adrian was sitting in his car on the shoulder of Halstead, both hands still locked on the wheel, the engine ticking. A second earlier, a delivery van had drifted into his lane, and he'd stood on the brakes hard enough to throw his coffee across the dash. The two bumpers had come within an inch of each other. Nothing touched. The driver leaned on his horn, shouted something Adrian couldn't hear through the glass, and pulled away. The car was fine. He should have just put it in drive and kept going, but he sat there with his hands gripping the wheel, feeling absolutely nothing. He didn't feel relieved. He just stared at the empty space between the bumpers, realizing he wouldn't have minded the crash. It would have been an ironclad excuse not to go to the office. His phone buzzed on the dashboard. Maya, his wife. He turned it face down. He didn't go home. He drove until he was tired of driving, parked in a lot he didn't recognize, and walked toward the first lit door he saw. A church side entrance stairs down to a basement. A printed sheet was taped to the door, Wednesdays 7 p.m., for anyone coming apart at work or coming apart at home. Folding chairs in a loose circle. A coffee urn. A dozen people who looked as tired as he felt. He sat in the back and said nothing the whole hour. A facilitator kept it moving. One person at a time, nobody fixing anybody. You could pass if you wanted. Adrian passed. When it ended, people started folding chairs and stacking them against the wall. And that was when the old man beside him spoke. "You stack, I'll carry," he said, holding out a chair. "Goes faster." His name was Walter, 70-something, a retired carpenter, originally out of Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Hands like sandpaper. They cleared the chairs without talking. At the door, Walter zipped his Carhartt and said, "I'm here most Wednesdays. Coffee's bad. Company's all right." Then he left. He didn't give a last name or offer to be a sounding board. He just zipped his coat and walked out to the lot. Adrian was 38. Creative director at a mid-size ad agency in the West Loop, the kind of job that gave you a glass office and took your weekends. 2 bonuses behind him. A marriage that had been going under quietly for 3 years. Maya didn't yell anymore. That was the worst part. The yelling had stopped, then the talking, and most nights they ate with the TV on, and neither of them changed the channel. A voice lived in his head, and he'd been letting it run the show for years. "You're going to mess this up. She's already gone. They'll figure out you're a fraud by Friday." He'd been hearing it so long he'd mistaken it for his own. He went back the next Wednesday without exactly deciding to. He stayed after again. This time, stacking chairs, he talked. Told Walter his name, that he worked in advertising, that his wife felt like a roommate he was afraid of. Walter didn't interrupt. He just chewed on a toothpick and nodded when Adrian paused. "You ever listen to how you talk to yourself?" Walter asked. "Not on purpose." That's the trouble. Walter set a chair on the stack. You wouldn't let a stranger talk that way to somebody you loved. You'd put him through a window. But you let it run all day in your own head and call it Tuesday. He told Adrian about a promise, not a rule, a promise. Be careful with your word. Don't swing it at yourself like a hammer. Don't aim it at people who aren't in the room. Say what you mean, say it once, then quit. Adrian went home and did something stupid. He kept a tally on his phone, a mark every time the voice said something cruel. 47 marks before lunch. He scrolled up to make sure he hadn't miscounted, then turned the phone face down. He stared at the ceiling all night. It wasn't the tally that kept him awake. It was the realization that this voice wasn't his. It was a stranger's. His boss, Conrad, had founded the agency, which was why no one had ever written him up. Every Monday, he picked someone in the room and took them apart. Numbers, slides, the way they dressed. It wasn't about pushing the team. Conrad just got off on humiliating people. A few days later, he'd act like they were all best friends. For 3 years, Adrian had taken every Monday personally, lying awake Sundays running the worst version of the meeting, so the real one would hurt less. He brought it to Walter on a Saturday. He'd asked, at the end of a meeting, whether he could see where the old man worked, and Walter, instead of an address, had said, "I'm patching a porch roof over on Wallace. Come if you want to be useful." So Adrian found him on a ladder, a half box of shingles balanced on his shoulder, sweating through his shirt. They worked an hour before Walter said anything worth keeping. "What that man says about you on a Monday isn't about you," Walter said, driving a nail. "It's the weather inside his own head. You keep picking up his trash and stuffing it in your pockets like it's yours to carry." He looked down from the ladder. "You wouldn't drink another man's poison and call it lunch. So why do you swallow his every Monday?" "Stop treating his bad moods like your personal property," Walter said, hammering a nail. "It's just noise. Let him yell at the walls." The next Monday, Conrad came in with the look he got when he hadn't slept. He scanned Adrian's deck. "This is amateur hour. Did a college kid build this?" A year earlier, Adrian would have spent the day counting ceiling tiles. This time he just nodded. "I'll have the fix by 3. He did it by 2:45 and was on the pink line by 6. That was when Conrad started testing him. He clocked Adrian leaving on time and didn't like it. "Must be nice," he said one evening, loud enough for the floor to hear, "keeping bankers' hours while the rest of us carry the place." A week later, he moved a deadline up 2 days without telling him, then asked in front of the team why Adrian wasn't further along. The provocation was real and aimed. Conrad ran the floor on a simple metric. If you didn't look like you were dying of exhaustion, you weren't working hard enough. Adrian held the line anyway. He left at 6. He slept. And a strange thing came with the sleep. His head got quiet enough to think. Maya looked up from her plate the night he came home early. "You're quiet." "Just thinking." "About what?" "How loud I usually am in my own head." She put her fork down. They ate in silence. The tension was still there, heavy and unresolved. But she left her feet on the couch when he sat down and didn't move them. It had been a long time. That should have been the turning point. It wasn't. 3 weeks later, he came home and found Maya on the phone in the kitchen, talking low. She hung up the second she saw him and didn't say who it was. His stomach dropped. The paranoid itch in his brain flared up instantly, running worst-case scenarios. He didn't sleep. By noon the next day, he'd built the whole movie. Who the man was, how long, what he'd pack first. He almost let it run all the way to the end. Instead, he drove out to find Walter. Not at home. He still didn't have the address. He went to the lumberyard the old man had mentioned, and there he was, loading 2x4s into a battered truck, arguing good-naturedly with the kid at the register. Walter waved him over, handed him the other end of a board, and only after it was racked did he say, "You've got a face on you. Talk." Adrian told him everything in one long, ugly sentence. Walter chewed it over. "You ask her who was on the phone?" "No." "So you wrote a whole novel about a stranger and handed him your wife?" He wiped his hands on a rag. "Third one's the hardest. Don't make assumptions. Your head's a storyteller, and it's good. It'll write the worst version of any story and swear it's the news. You want the truth, you open your mouth and ask. Especially when you're scared." That night, Adrian sat on the edge of the bed where Maya was reading. "Who were you on the phone with yesterday?" She didn't look up right away. When she did, her face was tired in a way he hadn't let himself notice. "A therapist," she said. "For me. I've been going for 2 months. I didn't tell you because I didn't know if I was figuring out how to fix us or how to leave." The elaborate cheating scenario he'd been obsessing over all day completely collapsed. He couldn't get angry. She'd done the one thing he'd been too proud to do. "Which one is it?" he asked. "Fixing or leaving?" "I don't know yet," she said. And then quieter. "I didn't think you'd want to know either way." He took her hand. "I want to know." That week, Adrian made the call himself. Couples counseling, both names on the intake form. It was not magic. The first session was 40 minutes of careful, awful honesty and 20 minutes of silence. The drive home was suffocating, the air in the car heavy with things they still couldn't say. The second session was worse, ending with Maya crying and Adrian staring at his shoelaces. But they kept going. Walking out to the parking lot after the third session, the tension had finally broken just a fraction. Maya slid her hand into his without thinking about it and said, "We'll be okay either way." It wasn't a fix, and they still had a long way to go, but it felt like a truce. The fourth promise took the longest. Between holding his ground at the agency and the exhausting, raw work of counseling, Adrian felt like he was failing at both. He was trying to give 110% everywhere and burning out all over again. The voice crept back in, whispering that he couldn't keep this up. He found Walter in a garage workshop this time, wearing a dust mask and running a sanding block over a heavy oak tabletop. Adrian confessed that he was slipping, that his best wasn't enough anymore. Walter pulled the mask down and laughed, blowing sawdust off the grain. "Best is a moving target," he said. "Your best on a Tuesday isn't your best on a Saturday. Your best with a sore back isn't your best after a good night. Anyone asking for 110% has clearly never done a day of real work in their life." He set down his coffee. Show up. Do what the day actually allows. Don't half-step it on purpose, and don't grind yourself into the floor pretending there's more in the tank. That's the fourth. Always do your best and let your best be honest. A month later, the agency lost a major account. Conrad pulled Adrian into his office and told him the next pitch had to land or there'd be layoffs, and that Adrian's name was on a list nobody was supposed to see. Said it watching his face for the flinch. The old Adrian would have gone 4 nights without sleep and walked into that pitch gray and hollow, reading his slides like a hostage video. He didn't. He slept. He ate lunch. And because his head was clear for once, he caught it. A hole in the media plan everyone had skated past. The budget pinned the launch to a window that landed dead in the client's slowest sales quarter. Exhausted 3 weeks earlier, he'd have presented it without ever seeing it. Rested, he found it in an afternoon, rebuilt the timing argument around the fix, and made that the spine of the pitch. Getting 8 hours of sleep hadn't fixed his life, but it kept him from missing a glaring amateur mistake in the budget. Conrad knew it too. When the news came in, the older man walked past Adrian's desk, stopped, and looked at him for a long moment. Conrad walked by, didn't say a word, and just knocked on the glass partition. For him, that was a standing ovation, a small, begrudging concession, and walked back to his office without a word. 9 months after the first Wednesday, Walter died. In his chair, a coffee half finished on the side table. The funeral was full. Children, grandchildren, men who'd framed houses with him for 40 years, a whole pew from the church he'd belonged to longer than Adrian had been alive. Adrian sat near the back. He didn't speak. He kept his mouth shut. He barely knew the guy, and he didn't belong up there with the family. He waited until it was over, until the lot emptied and the last cars pulled away. Then he walked out to the grave and stood there with his hands in his pockets. "I was a mess when you handed me that chair," he said, not loud, mostly to himself. "You never told me what to do. You just kept saying things until I could hear them." He nodded at the turned earth. "I'm still bad at all 4. Less bad. I still screw it up most days," he mumbled at the dirt. "But I'm trying not to. So, thanks for the chair." He stood a while longer. Then he drove home. In the car, he turned the radio off, pulled out his phone, and called Maya. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey," he said. "Nothing's wrong. I wanted to hear your voice." She was quiet a second. Then the small, real laugh, the one he'd spent 3 years missing. "Drive safe," she said. He sat there with the phone still warm in his hand, and then he started the car.